The Battle of Worcester is the final battle in a series of civil wars fought from 1642 to 1651, known as the War of the Three Kingdoms or the English Civil Wars. I prefer the term British Civil Wars, as every nation in Britain was involved to some degree.
There's many reasons for why the civil wars broke out in Britain, the major ones being religious differences and political ones, the divine rights of the king, which was started by Henry VIII, taxation, such as the ship money, essentially a tax the king could levy in order to fund the Royal Navy. It was an unpopular taxation, more so than most, and exacerbated already simmering tensions towards the king, as one Englishman from the time commented. What foolery is this, that the country in general shall be thus much taxed with great sums to maintain the king's titles and honours? The king whom most of the blame can be placed upon is Charles I Stuart. He was a terrible king, unable to manage nearly all aspects of being a king of different kingdoms, his kingdoms being England, Ireland and Scotland, all separate thrones. However, by 1651, Charles I had been executed for his crimes against the people, and now Parliament ruled England. Yet the Scots were not satisfied with the actions of the English Parliament. After all, the English Parliament had just executed their king without their consent or consideration.
The Scots wasted no time in declaring the Prince of Wales as their king from a contemporary account, Munster, 12th of March, 1649. 2 months after the execution of Charles Stuart, Scotland has nominated the Prince of Wales as its legitimate king, and they want him to proceed to Scotland, but as they impose upon him some conditions about ratifying of the covenant, which was the one made in the past and agreed with the Parliament of England, it does not appear that he has yet decided to stir, to put himself into the hands of that people, lest they sell him as they infamously sold his late father.
The Prince of Wales, now known as Charles II, was living in The Hague in the Netherlands during this time. Charles was in every sense the opposite of his father. Charles was tall, over 6 foot, brave and charismatic, and a lover of actresses. In England, the English Parliament now turned towards being a republic and were trying to raise cash and implement its authority. From a report from the 25th of March, 1649.
The Commons are unrelenting towards the memory of the later king. Thus they have recently ordered all his jewels and valuables to be sold, to use the money for the fleet. Further, everything pertaining to the revenues of the royal house, i.e. of the Queen and Prince, and generally all that was of the royal domain, is to be annexed to the Republic. The sale of the property of religious and bishops is to be continued. All contracts and public instruments in the future are to be made by the order and in the name of the new republic. Those who speak in favour of the dead king are to be punished.
So it seems that chopping off the head of the king didn't really do the English Parliament any favours, and war with the Scots was on the horizon, plus the many issues going on in Ireland. It seems that no matter whatever the many different sides did, it would always cause an issue with the other side, as Charles was also going to be in difficulties if he accepted one crown.
The commissioners of Scotland for conducting the King of England to that kingdom have arrived at Rotterdam, but there are difficulties. First, because of the divisions which reign in the country itself, so that if the king makes a compact with one side, the other will take offence and will unite with the Parliament of England. Second, because the Scots pretend that the king shall confirm the covenant established between that country and England, which the late king chose to rather die than accept.
So those quotes explain how the situation is at the moment for Britain after the death of Charles I. And for this video, I want to use as many contemporary accounts for the Battle of Worcester as I possibly can. because for this period of history, there's not just so many contemporary accounts, both from the main characters of this period, such as Charles II and Oliver Cromwell, but also tales of just the average person, swept up in these horrid conflicts. There's many tales of various people from the British Civil Wars that it would be impossible to go over every single story just in this video. However, I will quote quite a number of them. Moving on. With Charles landing in Scotland by June 1650, the final phase of the British Civil Wars began. The Scots had prepared a large army, as did Cromwell. At this point, Cromwell was at his most military and politically powerful. The wars had seen his rise from relative obscurity to a master on the battlefield, and the figurehead of the English army. Cromwell was a religious zealot who believed his victories were God's way of telling him he was doing the righteous work. Remember, this is a period of history in Britain of deep religious changes of various sects of Christianity, which can be summarized with, they all worship the same bloody thing, they just can't agree on how to bloody do it. A quote from Cromwell upon learning of Charles's alliance with the Scots, of which Cromwell stated was, against the very power of godliness and holiness. As for the royalist side, we have a report from the 19th of July, 1650, from the French court.
The Duke of York has written to his mother telling her that the Scots have declared war against England to begin in 3 months' time, so that they may be able to arm sufficiently. The English ridiculed the announcement because of this quarter's notice attached to it, and desired Cromwell to prepare for action, meaning to attack at once, the enemy being in no condition to make any great resistance. An act has been passed limiting Cromwell's army to 25,000 men, and Fairfax has withdrawn from command to enjoy his private tranquility.
The final phase of the British Civil Wars is now underway, with Charles's reluctant arrival in Scotland. Yet the Scots would soon suffer a major defeat at the Battle of Dunbar in September 1650.
One report sent to the French court, where Charles's mother was staying, states, "The Scottish army, although vastly superior in numbers to that of Cromwell, has been completely defeated. 4,000 were slain, 12,000 taken, and 6,000 put to flight. So the king is more immersed in misery and trouble than ever, yet he is busy gathering troops and collecting fugitives from the late battle." Cromwell himself reported that the enemy made a gallant resistance, and there was a very hot dispute at sword's point between our horses and theirs.
Despite this defeat, Charles was crowned King of Scotland on the 1st of January 1651, and with his newly gained kingship, he set about raising his own army to take the English throne. But it would be difficult, as Cromwell and his army were still in Scotland, fighting across Edinburgh, Stirling, Perth, and other locations, whilst Charles, General Leslie, and the Duke of Hamilton were trying to build an army. By the 8th of June, it was reported,
"The king's power is absolute. All interests are received, all factions composed, the ambitious defeated, the army cheerful, accomplished, numerous."
Cromwell's own progress was halted by illness early in the year of 1651. Cromwell's plan was to draw the Scots into open battle and crush them, as this was the new model army at its finest. By June 1651, Cromwell, in a letter to the Lord President of the Council of State, mentions his illness being relieved by his faith in God and not needing to return to England for a change of air. As for the royalist side, another report sent to France.
Such favourable news comes from England that if there were not reason to fear that the Queen announces it designedly, it might be possible to hope for the restoration of the monarchy. The king has entered England with 16,000 combatants, where he defeated 2 corps of cavalry, and is proceeding with growing prosperity, various towns having declared for him, while his forces are augmented by the nobles who keep flocking to him. But he is being followed by Cromwell, and here the court prefers to hope rather than to fear.
With most of Scotland being occupied by Cromwell's forces, Charles decided to make for England with the army he had raised. Charles had hoped for an influx of royal support and troops from the cities on the journey across England, yet he barely gained any support on his way towards Worcester. London was Charles's first choice, but the way was too dangerous and heavily defended without more men and supplies. By August, Charles's army was by Carlisle, which refused him entry. The Council of State in England had suppressed many royalists around England before Charles had even arrived. Charles's army size ranged from 12 to 16,000, and Charles hoped that by reaching Worcester, it could become his rally point for troops from England and Wales. Wales had always been a royalist stronghold during the whole of the civil wars. Yet as Charles's army progressed through England, many cities refused him entry. After all, why should they? The Scots were still considered enemies, and letting in an army that size would become a massive logistical and financial burden. Remember, this is before the Acts of Union. England and Scotland have only been under the same kings for less than 50 years. As for Cromwell's army, from a letter dated the 4th of August,
Major General Harrison, with the horse and dragoons under him, and Colonel Rich, and the rest in those parts, shall attend the motion of the enemy, and endeavour the keeping of them together, also to impede his march, and will be ready to be in conjunction with what force shall gather together for this service, to whom orders have been speeded to that purpose. And this enclosed to Major General Harrison will show. Major General Lambert this day marched with a very considerable body of horse up towards the enemy's rear, with the rest of the horse and 9 regiments of foot, most of them of your old foot and horse. I am hastening up, and shall, by the Lord's help, use utmost diligence. I hope I have left a commanding force under Lieutenant General Monk in Scotland.
This contemporary map of Worcester shows a good amount of the battle, but not all the locations of the fighting. As for the army movements across England, yet both armies moved at a remarkable pace, with Charles's army covering 300 miles in as little as 21 days, reaching Worcester on the 23rd of August. Yet Worcester, despite the nickname the Faithful City, it's more of an ironic title. Swapping sides during the civil wars was a common tactic for many places and people. The defences of Worcester had been slighted back in 1646 after a siege, which was a common tactic during the wars, to deny the enemy the chance to fortify and dig in. So despite an attempt by the citizens of Worcester to try and resist the Scottish army, they simply didn't have the necessary troops or defences. The garrison had left the city after a brief skirmish. One royalist soldier reported on the city's defences. The city was neither fortified nor victualled. His Majesty thought he could not in honour leave them to be plundered by the enemy who had so willingly received him. Another problem for Charles's situation was that his commanders were not getting along. Leslie would whine and moan, possibly suffering from depression and arguing about strategy. Now both sides prepared for battle. Cromwell's forces would swell to nearly 30,000 men from some estimates, while Charles had no more than 16,000. While Worcester was not the most offensively built city, especially after its slighting from the 1646 siege, Worcester did have the River Severn forming a natural defence for the city. The major bridge into the city by the river was referred to as the Bridge over the Severn, plus another river would have to be forded to attack from the south, called the River Thames. The bridge there is known as the Powick Bridge, a medieval bridge which still stands to this day. This was also where the first clash of the parliamentarians and royalists occurred in 1642. Cromwell, having an advantage in numbers, attacking a somewhat fortified city would still result in significant casualties, unless the royalist army could be drawn out of the city.
Worcester's defences were soon built up quickly to what they could be in such a short time. One hill was turned into a makeshift star fort, which is what I'm currently standing on now. This is now known as Fort Royal Park. This was where Charles placed his cannons during the battle to defend it from the east. Now, unfortunately, most of the modern battlefield was built up by the Victorians. However, Fort Royal still gives an impressive view of the whole city, and you can really see why it was of strategic importance for the Royalists. With one Colonel Robert Stapleton commenting, "They have raised a very fair and large fort on this side of the town, which they possess and man very strongly." The cathedral tower behind me became Charles's lookout point to see the approaching parliamentarian army and its attacks towards the city. Behind me also, down there, was where the Sidbury Gate was, one of the major gates to get into the city of Worcester.
Now, where the gate was is now a bridge over the canal, which was constructed in the 18th century. But the royalist headquarters, where many war meetings were held, is called the Commandery, originally a monastic hospital just outside the city's gate. This was where the Duke of Hamilton made his base and stayed at before the battle. It's one of the few medieval buildings to survive the siege of 1646 and the battle. It's a lovely museum dedicated to the battle and the civil wars. Supplies were also in harsh demand, and many citizens of Worcester were resentful to feed and clothe the majority Scottish army. There was also the issue of ammunition for the muskets. Lead was stripped off many buildings to use to make musket balls. Morale was also a major issue for Charles's exhausted troops, as one parliamentarian officer recorded.
The Scotch had left a party in Worcester and had transported their army over Severn, intending to secure the passes, invite their friends to them, and refresh all their wearied army. That their army is 12,000 and foot effective, and the foot so much harassed by often and frequent marches, that they did importune the king to take pity on them, who answered that they should suddenly have refreshment, gave them good word, and told them what help he expected from his friends.
As for Cromwell, he was gathering men from across England, blocking all routes around Worcester. This time, the Royalists would not get away. Cromwell's main army was stationed here in Evesham. This bow tower was built in 1532 and still has the marks from an earlier battle during the Civil Wars, with many musket ball marks on the tower still.
Similar marks can be seen here at St. Peter's Church. This is located in the village of Powick, just south of the city of Worcester. This location was where the first clashes happened that began the Battle of Worcester on the 3rd of September 1651. Now, for explaining the battle, I'll be quoting from some eyewitness accounts during the battle and afterwards, and we'll start with the man leading the parliamentarian forces, Oliver Cromwell, from his letter to Parliament written at 10 o'clock at night on the 3rd of September 1651.
For the Honourable William Lenthall, Esquire, Speaker of the Parliament of England, these, near Worcester, 3rd of September 1651, 10 at night. Sir, being so weary and scarce able to write, yet I thought it my duty to let you know thus much, that upon this day, being 3rd September, we built a bridge of boats over Severn, between it and Thames, about half a mile from Worcester, and another over Thames, within pistol shot of our other bridge. Lieutenant General Fleetwood and Major General Dean marched from Upton on the southwest side of Severn up to Powick, a town which was a pass the enemy kept. We, from our side of Severn, passed over some horse and foot, and were in conjunction with Lieutenant General's forces. We beat the enemy from hedge to hedge, till we beat them into Worcester. The enemy then drew all his force on the other side the town, all but what he had lost, and made a very considerable fight with us for 3 hours' space. But in the end, we beat them totally, and pursued him to his royal fort, which we took, and indeed have beaten his whole army. When we took this fort, we turned his own guns upon him. The enemy hath had great loss, and certainly is scattered, and run several ways. We are in pursuit of him, and have laid forces in several places, that we hope will gather him up. Indeed, this has been a very glorious mercy, and as stiff a contest for 4 or 5 hours as ever I have seen. Both your old forces and those new raised have behaved themselves with very great courage, and he that made them come out made them willing to fight for you. The Lord God Almighty frame our hearts to real thankfulness for this, which is alone his doing. I hope I shall within a day or two give you a more perfect account. In the meantime, I hope you will pardon, sir, your most humble servant, Oliver Cromwell.
The King Charles version of the Battle of Worcester is more about his grand escape from the burning city to hiding up the oak tree at Boscoville House, all along now which is referred to as the Monarch's Way. Now, there is a report sent to the French court in Paris a month after the battle. Quote, "When it was thought that the King of England might relieve his drooping fortunes, since he had an army of over 20,000 good soldiers, and some towns had declared for him, he has been completely defeated by Cromwell, and forced to seek safety in the mountains of Scotland with 3,000 horse. The position of his army was very strong, because he had a river on his front and on his flank. Cromwell was not the stronger, as his army was in 2 corps, and the king might hope to beat them separately. But the enemy built a great bridge of boats, and were able to get so many men across, that they not only withstood the royal forces who advanced against them, but drove them back in disorder. So instead of a small skirmish, the king found himself obliged to give battle, in which he lost all his guns and baggage, most of his officers, and all hopes of recovery, unless the peace between the crowns supplies him with foreign forces before some accident overtakes him, or imprisonment or death."
Now, the final account is from 1661, and a pro-royalist account. However, the details are, in my opinion, one of the best accounts of the whole battle. Quote, "The enemy assaulted Powick Bridge furiously, which was valiantly defended by a brigade of horse and foot under Major General Robert Montgomery and Colonel George Keith, till the former, being dangerously wounded and his ammunition spent, was forced to retire disorderly into Worcester, and the latter was taken prisoner by the enemy. This place being won, there was no time to deliberate longer, wherefore it was resolved to engage Cromwell forthwith, who lay at Perry Woods within a mile of Worcester. The onset was given with a great deal of fury by the royalists, insomuch that Cromwell's invincible lifeguard was unable to bear the shock, and compelled to give ground in some disorder. Their great guns were also for some time in the power of the royalists. The rebel commanders had put the new raised county forces to bear the first brunt of the encounter, of whom the royalists made a horrible slaughter. His Majesty himself led up the Scotch foot in this battle, and that was so much courage and gallantry that his inveterate enemy, Cromwell, could not but applaud his valour. The fight continued for the space of 3 or 4 hours, very sharp and fierce, during which his Majesty had his horse twice shot under him, and rallied the infantry himself, until by successive supplies of fresh forces they were in a manner all lost. The rebels had great advantage, not only in being more numerous, but fighting both with horse and foot, against His Majesty's foot only, for the Scotch horse did not engage at all in this encounter, which some impute to the treachery of David Leslie, who, in the meantime, commanded a brave body of horse to stand still and look on the ruins of their king and fellow subjects, threatening the first man that stirred with death, for the truth of which was relations I dare not undertake. But it is certain the Scotch horse under Leslie was scarce any more than spectators of the battle. Nor is it incredible but that treachery might be practised by a Scot, and money employed by Cromwell for conquest as well as force. The remainder of the forlorn royal army, being put to flight, were pursued into the town by the victors. His Majesty was one of the last in the field, and could hardly be persuaded to outlive that day. At Sudbury Gate, through which the routed royalists fled, an ammunition wagon was overthrown and lay across the passage, so that His Majesty was enforced to alight and enter into the city on foot. In the Friars Street he took a fresh horse, and perceiving many of his foot thrown down their arms and declined fighting, he rode up and down among them, sometimes with his hat in his hand, entreating them to stand to their arms and sell their lives as dear as they could. But seeing his encouragement ineffectual, he said, I had rather you would shoot me than keep me alive to see the sad consequences of this fateful day. Nevertheless, the Earl of Cleveland, Sir James Hamilton, Colonel William Carlis, and some officers rallied what force they could and gave a check to the enemy as they were entering in at Sudbury Gate, and valiantly disputed that street with them, which actions were very important to secure His Majesty's flight. In the meantime, Fleetwood's men were on the other side of the city, masters of St. John's, and having wholly dispersed all opposers, fell to plunder. As soon as Cromwell had made his way into Sudbury Street, while some of his forces were furiously killing and slaying all that were in the streets, he hastened with some regiments to Fort Royal, commanded by Colonel Drummond, where he found courageous opposition and lost 300 Cheshire men. But at length reducing it with twice the number of the defenders, he put every man of them to the sword, to the number of 1,500. Then was there seen the saddest spectacle that human imagination is capable to conceive, the streets being all stewed with carcasses and covered with blood, houses broken open and pillaged, and the whole town filled with the noise of the insolent victors and the cries of the poor inhabitants, till having satiated their cruelty and rapacious desires, or rather tired themselves with barbarous executions and inhumanities, they began to think of securing prisoners. The slain would reckon about 4,000, amongst whom was Duke Hamilton, who being taken, died soon after of his wounds, a very noble, courageous and loyal person, and worthy of immortal fame. The prisoners taken in the battle and in the city were about 7,000.
So, that's 3 different accounts of the battle. Now, the most significant casualty of the battle was the Duke of Hamilton, as the parliamentarian attack was getting bogged down in the south of the city, not far from Powick, due to the Scottish troops there contesting every hedgerow. Cromwell, attacking in the east of the city from his positions at Perry Woods and Red Hill, moved south over the bridges to assist them. Charles and Hamilton gathered what troops they could and led them out the Sudbury Gate towards an attack on Perry Woods and Red Hill. If they had captured these positions, then Cromwell, advancing from the south, could potentially get bombarded from 3 different positions. However, Cromwell, seeing this attack, led his troops back over this way to attack the flank of Charles and Hamilton's army. Now, at some point during the attack on Perry Woods and Red Hill, Hamilton was hit in the thigh. Wounded, he was brought back here to the commandery, where he later died of his injuries. He refused to have his leg amputated, which was the common practice of the time, and possibly died of sepsis either 9 days later or a week after the battle. Hamilton's loss and the increasing parliamentarian attack broke the royalists' morale, and they soon fled towards the Sidbury Gate. Whilst being chased by the parliamentarians, the fighting on Fort Royal was brutal, as 1,500 Scots were killed defending the hill. After its capture, the cannons were turned onto and bombarded the city, devastating it. Cromwell himself only lost about 200 men attacking Fort Royal.
The fighting that broke out in the city was horrific. Worcester was so heavily damaged, it cost the city in damages of hundreds of thousands of pounds back then, literally millions of pounds today. Yet Charles's brilliant escape is one of the few tales of this bloody conflict becoming romanticised. Yet Charles would never visit Worcester again, even after the restoration of the monarchy. As for the thousands of Scots captured, the figures range from 6,000 to 7,000. They were kept in the now battered cathedral until arrangements could be made. Many Scots were sent to the English colonies, with one destination being Boston in New England. These men would never see Scotland or their families ever again. As for the people of Worcester, many of them were left with damaged property and livelihoods destroyed. Worse still was the hundreds of people left maimed and severely injured from the fighting. There were so many people left injured and disabled from the British Civil Wars that Parliament passed a bill essentially meaning that people could petition Parliament for aid if they had suffered injury. There's a brilliant website called Civil War Partitions. The description from the website: Civil War partitions contain petitions to the state from veterans and their families for welfare payments as a result of injuries and bereavement sustained during the English Civil Wars. It's aimed to share information on the human costs of this devastating conflict, which continue to affect communities long after the fighting was over. I'll read out two examples, one from 1652 during the Commonwealth, and then one in 1660 after the restoration of King Charles.
The humble petition of Captain Randall Blackshaw, assigned William Alcock and John Dickens. Show unto your honours that your petitioners were all under the command of Colonel Henry Bradshaw at the late fight at Worcester, and were every one of them desperately wounded. That your petitioners have a long time lain under the hands of surgeons, and have spent very much of their estates to attain health, and for as much as your petitioners, some of them not yet cured, their charge and pains considered, may it please your honours to allow such allowance from the public, as your petitioners shall upon your just account make it to appear they have dispensed, paid, and are to pay for their curses, and they will pray.
Now for the 1661, this being the petition of Henry Peacock, Royalist trumpeter, May 1660. The humble petition of Henry Peacock, one of your Majesty's trumpeters, that for the space of 17 years last past your petitioner has been trumpeter in ordinary, sworn to your royal father of ever-blessed memory from your Majesty's side when you were prince, and was likewise sworn to your sacred Majesty at your being in Scotland, and he has ever continued loyal and faithful from the beginning of the war until this day, and by reason of the same he has suffered to the loss of all he had to the value of £1,500 and upwards, beside the hazard of his life, the loss of his blood, namely at Worcester fight, upon which by reason of his wounds the surgeons gave him over for a lost man, and after being imprisoned and barbarously used for his love and loyalty to your Majesty, and has since suffered much misery. Your petitioner therefore most humbly prays that your Majesty will be graciously pleased to grant a warrant to your petitioner, that he may be sworn trumpeter to your Majesty as formerly, and your petitioner shall daily pray for your Majesty's long and prosperous reign. However, the horrors were not over for the people of Worcester, as by 1786 the Battle of Worcester was rightly forgotten about, and the city had recovered from the damage. Yet 2 men came to visit Worcester in April. These 2 men were from a new nation, only recently formed, and these people called themselves Americans, from the United States of America, which included the city many Scots were sent to in 1652, Boston in New England. These 2 men were called John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, the later 2nd and 3rd presidents of the United States. John Adams was especially interested in the battle and its legacy, so much so that he berated the people of Worcester for not knowing or caring about the history of the battle. Quote,
"The people in the neighbourhood appeared so ignorant and careless at Worcester that I was provoked and asked, and do Englishmen soon forget the ground where liberty was fought for? Tell your neighbours and your children that this is holy ground, much holier than that on which your churches stand. All England should come in pilgrimage to this hill once a year." Now, what we have there is the first recorded account of the annoying American, an American who will come to Europe and lecture the people on the history and then claim to be some long-lost descendant of some Irish, Scottish, Welsh or English family. It's very annoying.
The British Civil Wars was indeed one of the worst conflicts to ever happen in Britain. Hundreds of thousands of people died, and many others were left with life-changing injuries. Yet, as soon as the war was over, many accounts were published from both sides, royalist and parliamentarian, and discussions about the effects and who to blame, and many other things were written about. There's so many books on the British Civil Wars.
This book is called Cromwell's Army, History of the English Soldier from 1642 to 1660. Published in 1902, and the preface starts off incredibly British with an apology. Quote, "It is necessary to begin this book with an apology. A civilian who undertakes to write the history of an army courts many perils and cannot hope to escape them all. The subject is full of pitfalls, which a little technical knowledge would enable a writer to avoid, and abounds with questions, which it requires both technical knowledge and military experience to treat adequately." Now remember, this book was published in 1902, well before the First and Second World Wars. So the Civil Wars were the bloodiest conflict in Britain before then, and is still the most personal ones, in my opinion. The fascination with this period died down after the World Wars, as those wars became popular for history books. Just look at the books that were published about World War I and especially World War II. There's absolutely loads of them.
The point I'm trying to make is that these wars should not be forgotten about, but should be talked about and reflected upon. And as someone who is from Worcestershire and makes history videos, I felt the desire to tell the story of the last battle of the British Civil Wars at Worcester. I'll leave you with this quote. "When their wives and children should ask them where they had been and what news, they should say they had been at Worcester, where England's sorrows began and where they were happily ended."